Well, good morning to all of you, and thank you very much for coming. My pleasure to welcome you to this Directors Forum with the Chairman and the CEO of Exxon Mobil, Rex W. Tillerson. Wilson Center was established by an act of Congress in 1968. It's the nation's official memorial to President Woodrow Wilson. It was founded to honor and build upon his legacy as a man who bridged the world of policy and scholarship. We try to bring together the thinkers and the doers, policymakers, scholars, business leaders, in the hope and the belief that a frank and open dialogue will lead to better understanding, cooperation, and public policy. Energy is one of the most important issues in global affairs today, as demands for it increase every year. Energy independence, energy security, climate change, environmental protection, all of these issues are a part of discussions that surround the past and the present and the future of energy. We're fortunate to have Rex Tillerson here, who leads the world's largest private oil company, to share his perspective with us. I'm also delighted to have with us the chairman of our board of directors, Joe Gildenhorn, a member of the board of directors, Iggy Sanchez, and I've been told that Debbie Dingle is here. Is Debbie here? I see Cal Dooley is here. We're delighted to see him as a former member. I'm obligated to introduce any former member. You'll appreciate that. If I don't, they cut my pension back. Jim Jones is here. I hope I haven't missed any others, but we're delighted to have him, and I was told Debbie Dingle might be here as well. Rex Tillerson became chairman and CEO of Exxon Mobil on January 1st, 2006, reaching the top of a company he first joined, then called Exxon Company, as a production engineer in 1975. From there, he quickly climbed the corporate ladder. In 1989, he became general manager of Exxon's Central Production Division. In 1992, he became production advisor to Exxon Corporation. He's overseen Exxon's operations in Yemen, the Commonwealth of Independent States, and other places around the world. He joined Exxon Mobil's board of directors in 2004. In August 2001, he became member of the Executive Committee and Policy Committee of the American Petroleum Institute. He is a trustee of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a member of the Executive Board of the Boy Scouts of America, director of the United Negro College Fund, and vice chairman of the Ford's Theater Society. Fortune magazine named him the 6th most powerful business person in the world. I'm not quite sure who the other 5 were, but he 6. That's pretty doggone good, number 6. A true oil man. He graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. He's a native of Wichita Falls, Texas. It's been my personal pleasure to experience his generous hospitality at the corporate headquarters in Dallas. Rex Tillerson, we welcome you to the Wilson Center. We look forward to your insights on one of the most important challenges this country confronts, and indeed all the world. After his address, he will take some questions from the audience. I ask that members of the media please hold their questions. There'll be a brief press conference following the conclusion of the Directors Forum. Mr. Tillerson. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction, Lee, and the warm welcome to the Wilson Center. It is indeed a privilege to speak here at the Wilson International Center for Scholars. President Wilson once said, and I quote him, "One cool judgment is worth 1,000 hasty counsels. The thing to do is to supply light and not heat." For decades, the Wilson Center, I think, has been a source of cool judgments and a supplier of light. In the years ahead, the United States and the world will need such wise counsel and informed expertise. Americans face the challenges of an increasingly complex and competitive world, and to surmount those challenges, we will need open minds, open dialogue, and a willingness to work together. In that spirit, today I would like to address the challenge of strengthening our nation's global energy security. I'll discuss the importance of building energy policies that support long-range thinking, encourage long-term investment and exploration into new supplies and technologies, and policies that allow our industry to develop an integrated set of solutions that are our best hope for increasing energy diversity, energy efficiency, and environmental performance. We meet at an historic time. November's elections mark the beginning of a new chapter in our nation's history. In choosing new leaders, the American people broke down old barriers and again showed the world the power and the promise of our democracy. Now we must move forward together to take on some of the most significant economic challenges in generations. To turn our economy around and lay the groundwork for sustained growth, we will need cool judgments, not hasty counsels. We must meet the urgent challenge of stimulating economic growth, to be sure. But in doing so, we must also address the long-term challenge of sustaining economic growth for the generations of Americans that will follow us. In the next 100 days, our leaders will likely craft policy that will have ramifications for the next 100 months, if not for decades. For this reason, it is imperative that as we confront the issues we see immediately before us, that we also look beyond the horizon. True leadership at this pivotal moment in our nation's economic history requires long-range thinking. The energy industry is a long-term enterprise, and decisions made today can have consequences for years to come. While elected officials, understandably, tend to think in terms of 2, 4, and 6 years based on election cycles, energy companies must necessarily think in terms of 2, 4, and 6 decades, consistent with the life cycle of our resource development projects. Even in the midst of our current economic downturn, which includes a return to more historic levels of crude oil prices, my company remains committed to investing in projects and technologies to meet tomorrow's needs. Our business model is based on rigorous and realistic long-term planning. We try to look through these near-term and short-term events. As part of this planning, we work to recognize risk factors that we know about today and can manage, with the acknowledgement that there will be unforeseen risk factors that we will also have to manage in the future. Our approach enables us to manage risk inherent in the energy business and in the broader business cycle. As a result, for more than 125 years, we have helped fuel the American economy during good times and during bad times. We look forward to bringing this long-term perspective to bear on the workings with the new Congress and new administration on the key energy challenges we face. Fortunately, our new leaders begin the work of addressing these long-term energy challenges with a firm foundation of public support in place, a foundation of support that has gone somewhat unnoticed. Through the vigorous debates on energy policy during the recent election campaign, prompted by the extraordinarily high energy prices this past year, Americans have become much more informed about the nature of the energy challenge. And as they have become more informed, an important consensus has begun to emerge. Americans increasingly understand that we face not one energy challenge, but multiple energy challenges. They understand that there is no single answer to our energy, efficiency, and environmental needs. Indeed, they recognize that we must pursue an integrated set of solutions that, when taken together over the long term, will help us develop new supplies of energy from all sources, accelerate gains in the efficient use of energy, and develop and deploy new technologies to curb greenhouse gas emissions. This broad consensus was reflected in the public and congressional support for lifting the moratorium on development of the United States' vast offshore oil and natural gas resources. This consensus also reflects the realities that govern the global market for energy to which the U.S. economy is inextricably linked. Understanding these realities including the dimensions and the dynamics of the international energy industry, is crucial to developing an effective policy framework for U.S. and global energy security. You cannot have one without the other. To help with this understanding, ExxonMobil prepares a forward-looking document each year called the Outlook for Energy, a copy of which we are making available to each of you today. To develop this forecast, we bring together the best thinking of our scientists, our engineers, and our business people in assessing global energy supply and demand trends and challenges. The message of the Outlook for Energy is quite clear. Despite current economic conditions, we will continue to experience ongoing growth in energy demand around the world and in the decades to come. And this demand will be driven primarily by economic expansion, especially in the developing world. This simple and undeniable fact is echoed by detailed analysis from many other sources. Both the U.S. Energy Information Administration and the International Energy Agency forecast higher energy demand worldwide. Energy demand is not just set to grow, it is set to grow significantly. By the year 2030, we forecast the world's energy needs will be about 35% higher than they were in 2005, even with substantial future gains in efficiency and taking into consideration the current economic slowdown. Most of this demand growth will occur in developing countries where populations and economies are growing the most rapidly. China and India will account for more than 40% of the world's incremental energy demand going forward. The Middle East has also become a substantial new consumer of energy. This fundamental fact means that we must produce more energy from all available and commercially viable resources. Doing so will require us to increase the use of alternative sources. Many have made progress in recent years. Nuclear, hydroelectric, geothermal, wind, and solar energy already contribute, and they will increasingly help our economy as they become more efficient and more competitive. Developing all of our energy resources, though, will also require us to find and produce more oil and natural gas. Fossil fuels currently provide the vast majority of the world's energy, and due to their availability, their affordability, and their versatility, they will continue to do so in the years to come. Oil and natural gas alone will continue to supply nearly 60% of the world's needs through the year 2030. The continued abundance of oil is another reason it will remain a vital energy source for the foreseeable future. The United States Geological Survey estimates that the Earth was endowed with about 3 trillion barrels of conventional oil, of which only about 1 trillion has been produced and consumed to date. However, these conventional supplies of petroleum are often found in hard-to-reach places. For the sake of U.S. and global energy security, we will need to put in place sound, long-range policies so the energy industry can find and develop these resources. These new energy projects will demand new technologies, massive capital investment, and greater cooperation and trade among the nations of the world. As we plan for the future, we must remember that it is not just the tremendous growth rate in energy demand that should guide our policies. We must also be guided by an understanding of the magnitude and the time scale required to meet the challenges of this growing energy demand. Americans currently consume almost 20 million barrels of oil a day. With significant improvements in energy efficiency, we expect U.S. demand will actually be lower by the year 2030 at approximately 17 million barrels a day, a reduction of almost 18%. The efficiency gains outlined in our outlook are challenging, but we believe are achievable. However, even with these gains, we expect total worldwide oil demand to grow from the current 85 million barrels per day to about 105 million barrels per day by the year 2030. We expect the current downturn to be temporary, and when economic growth returns, we will see strong energy demand return, especially from the developing world. With this new energy demand, we also foresee an increase in greenhouse gas emissions associated with energy use. Globally, the outlook for energy expects energy-related carbon dioxide emissions to rise by an average of 1% per year through the year 2030. These two fundamental realities meeting enormous demand growth, and managing the risk of greenhouse gas emissions are the twin challenges of our time. While the United States is likely to reduce its demand for oil by 2030, in the years ahead we will face stiffer competition for energy resources from growing economies elsewhere, global economies that will be vital to the U.S. economic recovery and growth as well. It is this future that compels us to lay the groundwork today for a long-term global energy strategy that will meet not just U.S. energy needs, but those of the global economies as well. Meeting our many energy challenges requires a multidimensional approach. We must first formulate and put in place long-term policies that support an integrated set of solutions that help us find new energy supplies, increase energy efficiency, and discover innovations that can address climate risk in the most effective manner. By combining energy, efficiency, and environmental goals, integrated solutions help us develop and deploy new technologies at every point in the energy supply and consumption chain. In this way, we can meet our multiple energy challenges with multiple solutions. Integrated solutions will increase energy diversity by improving and advancing the efficient use of all economically viable energy sources. The outcome will be to provide flexibility and resiliency to market participants who seek the most effective and efficient sources of energy to meet their needs. Unleashing the potential of these integrated solutions should begin right here at home. The United States is endowed with enormous oil and natural gas resources. It is estimated there is enough oil and natural gas offshore and in non-wilderness and non-park lands to fuel 50 million cars and heat nearly 100 million homes for the next 25 years, providing an important link of time and resources as we work toward future energy solutions. Technology advances have not stood still in the petroleum industry. We have the technology to explore for, develop, produce, and transport to consumers the energy from these domestic reserves safely, reliably, and responsibly, just as we are doing in countries the world over. For example, technology recently developed by my company has made it economically possible to produce natural gas trapped in extremely tight rock formations far below the Earth's surface. Previously, these resources were not recoverable. In Colorado, the amount of gas from one field alone will be enough to heat 50 million U.S. homes for the next decade. By increasing the availability and affordability of natural gas here at home and elsewhere in the world, we diversify the world's energy portfolio and we strengthen global energy security. Increased natural gas production is especially helpful in meeting the enormous demand for power generation. And because natural gas is relatively clean burning when compared to other conventional sources, it has important environmental advantages as well. Developing new supplies of energy will also require us to develop integrated solutions beyond our borders. As an example, my company is working with others to develop new technologies to provide the economies of the world with greater access to natural gas resources by delivering it in liquid form, or LNG. The new QMAX ships that we have developed in conjunction with our partner Qatar Petroleum can transport 80% more LNG cargo than current conventional-sized ships, yet they require approximately 40% less energy per unit of cargo thanks to improved economies of scale and new, more efficient propulsion systems. This technology gives us the capability to economically and efficiently deliver natural gas to markets essentially anywhere in the world, and most particularly in Europe and North America. The creation of this vast global infrastructure and the deployment of QMAX vessels are a reminder of the power of technology applied through global partnerships with resource owners to meet growing energy needs. While increasing global energy supplies to meet growing demand, we must also encourage the wise use of these energy resources. Energy efficiency will be an essential element in the world's ability to manage its energy challenges in the decades to come. For those who might doubt the potential contributions of energy efficiency, consider this fact. Here in the United States, since 1970, reductions in energy intensity, or the energy inputs required per unit of GDP output, effectively met well over half of America's growth in energy demand. Efficient energy use extends the life of the world's resource endowment. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It supports stable, affordable energy for consumers. And it strengthens our energy security. Over the past 25 years, worldwide gains in energy efficiency have helped lower global energy intensity by about 1% annually. As a result, the global economy is growing more resilient to energy demand and supply shocks. The effects of sudden changes in energy prices have a dampened economic impact because energy, while still vital, is a relatively smaller input to the goods and services the world produces today than it was a quarter of a century ago. Many of the most promising opportunities for efficiency gains are in the transportation sector, where both incremental and breakthrough innovations can have a big impact. At Exxon Mobil, we've been engaged for many years in ongoing collaborations with automakers and engine manufacturers to develop new, energy-saving technologies that can power a new generation of vehicles. One is a new engine technology called homogeneous charge compression ignition, or HCCI, which combines the best features of gasoline and diesel-powered engines. The results could be up to 30% better fuel economy and lower emissions. We're also working with major tire manufacturers, where together we have developed a new tire lining technology that uses up to 80% less material in the manufacturing process, making tires lighter and keeping them properly inflated. A car with underinflated tires burns up to an extra tank of gasoline every year. One particularly productive partnership of ours has been in the area of vehicle battery technologies. In 2007, we unveiled new separator films developed by our petrochemical company for lithium-ion batteries. These films have the potential to improve the energy efficiency and affordability of next-generation hybrid electric vehicles. If just 10% of the light-duty vehicle fleet were hybrids, carbon dioxide reductions would be the equivalent of taking 5 million cars off the road. And finally, our scientists and engineers are working with those from other industries on breakthrough technology that could advance the use of hydrogen fuel cells. This new technology, which has been under development for more than a decade, will be applied first to industrial vehicles, such as forklifts. Our approach, quite different than most, converts traditional hydrocarbon fuel, such as gasoline, into hydrogen directly on board the vehicle, eliminating the need for separate facilities for producing and distributing hydrogen. Measured on a well-to-wheels basis, this on-vehicle hydrogen fuel system could be up to 80% more fuel efficient and emit 45% less carbon dioxide than today's internal combustion engine. I've given you these few examples to make the point that there's much that can still be done with the energy resources and systems we have today, and they will be important to a comprehensive set of solutions. Integrated solutions also hold the promise of helping reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The first and most significant step is to continue the energy efficiency gains mentioned earlier. Businesses of all types, including my own, must systematically work to improve efficiency and environmental performance throughout our facilities the world over. Since 2004, we have invested more than $1.5 billion in activities that improve energy efficiency with a companion reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and will be spending about $500 million more over the next 5 years. Through efficiency actions taken in 2006 and 2007 alone, we reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by about 5 million metric tons. Notwithstanding these types of improvements, with rising energy demand, especially in developing nations, we still expect an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. For example, by the year 2030, China's emissions will be comparable to the combined emissions of the United States and Europe. With a new Congress and a new administration, we have an opportunity to expand the dialogue about how America can best make an impact on this important global issue. As this dialogue goes forward, we must be mindful that sound public policy must not impede innovation, inhibit competition, or add market uncertainties by picking winners and losers. Good policy sets aspirational goals that represents the needs of the people, and then provides the broad framework for entrepreneurs and innovative thinkers to achieve these goals. In my view, we can develop long-term policies that will achieve our shared goals for providing the energy necessary to economic growth, sustained quality of life, as well as to protect the environment. One element of the policy debate that seems to separate us is a difference of opinion about the time frames involved to achieve these aspirational goals. As an active participant in technology research and development, we understand the time frames required to identify and develop new solutions, commercialize them, and deploy them in a meaningful way through this vast and enormous energy system that is so vital to people's everyday lives. My greatest concern is that policymakers will attempt to mandate or ordain solutions that are doomed to fail, and we will be set back even further from necessary and viable solutions. One policy option that is intended to reduce emissions and which has received much attention is a cap-and-trade system. But before we rush to enact such a system, we must ask whether it can best achieve our shared goal of actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Such a system was put in place in the European Union. Unfortunately, the European scheme is struggling to achieve the overall reductions that its supporters had hoped for. One of the reasons for this is that cap-and-trade systems inevitably introduce unnecessary cost and complexity that undercut their effectiveness. It is important to remember that a cap-and-trade system requires a new market infrastructure for traders to trade emission allowances. This new Wall Street of emissions brokers will take the emphasis away from the goal of reducing carbon emission and focus its attention on trading on price volatility. For businesses and consumers, these market gatekeepers and resultant price swings add cost and they create uncertainty. Also, cap-and-trade systems, because of their complexity, have inherent problems with verification and accountability. They require a vast expansion of administrative and regulatory officials to ensure emissions allowances are not exceeded. This is another cost for businesses and consumers to bear. There is another policy option that should be considered, and that is a carbon tax. As a businessman, it's hard to speak favorably about any new tax. But a carbon tax strikes me as more direct, a more transparent, and a more effective approach. It avoids the cost and complexity of having to build a new market for securities traders, or the necessity of adding a new layer of regulators and administrators to police companies and consumers. And a carbon tax can be more easily implemented. It could be levied under the current tax code without requiring significant new infrastructure or enforcement bureaucracies. A carbon tax is also the most efficient means of reflecting the cost of carbon in all economic decisions, from investments made by companies to fuel their requirements to the product choices made by consumers. In addition, such a tax should be made revenue neutral. In other words, the size of government need not increase due to the imposition of a carbon tax. There should be reductions or changes to other taxes, such as income or excise taxes, to offset the impacts of the carbon tax on the economy. Finally, there is another potential advantage to the direct tax market cost approach. A carbon tax may be better suited for setting a uniform standard to hold all nations accountable. This last point is important. Given the global nature of the challenge and the fact that the economic growth in developing economies will account for a significant portion of future greenhouse gas emission increases, policy options must encourage and support global engagement. Whether we are developing new energy supplies or reducing greenhouse gas emissions, our integrated solutions flow from our dedication to effective risk management, finding the best way to balance cost and benefits through careful analysis and long-term planning. As government looks to our industry to provide the energy our economy needs, we look forward to being part of the discussion. Government cooperation can help minimize the outside risk variables that come from the fundamental policy shifts. By committing to stable and sound policy, government can help energy companies engage in long-term thinking and find new ways to provide fuel and power for economic growth. The American people have made clear they want to make energy a national priority. Our government must play an important role in this effort. First, our country's tax and regulatory framework should be stable and consistent to promote the long-term investments that are required. Second, our country should continue to allow more access to domestic resources. And third, our country should press forward with free trade. The energy industry is built on disciplined investing, operational excellence, and long time horizons. As oil and natural gas are found in harder-to-reach environments, it is vital that the energy industry be able to invest in the technologies that ensure that we can develop reserves in an affordable, secure, and environmentally responsible way. Price volatility is inherent in the commodity business, and we are quite accustomed to accepting the price risk on our very large and long-term investments. Over just the last 6 months, we've seen the price of oil swing from $147 a barrel in July to less than $40 a barrel in December. But our industry prepares for these uncertainties with long-term planning and by saving in the good times. But sudden changes in fiscal and regulatory policies can impede our ability to do so in the future. As more nations join the ranks of developed economies, America's best hope for re-energizing growth, increasing energy security, and creating new jobs is to put in place a stable policy framework that supports investment, research and development, and the international competitiveness of American companies. This long-term, growth-oriented policy approach, coupled with the American people's support for increased access to domestic energy supplies, would enable the energy sector to contribute even more to the American economy. Congress deserves great credit for its recent moves to open up domestic access. Now that Congress has acted, we must work together to take the practical steps to turn this action into reality by working to facilitate access to these domestic energy resources for new exploration activity. According to a recent study, developing the areas of the United States that have been kept off limits would generate more than $1.7 trillion in new government revenue and create more than 160,000 jobs. Opening up U.S. supplies of oil and natural gas would boost our economy by simultaneously lowering the cost of energy, increasing employment, and providing a new source of government revenue. Yet the access challenges we face are not just a domestic political challenge. There are global challenges. In the years ahead, access to energy resources the world over will affect America's energy security. We will need international cooperation and free trade to ensure we can bring the energy industry's know-how, financial strength, and innovative technologies to the task of accessing energy resources in hard-to-reach places, regardless of borders or barriers. The need for international cooperation provides another opportunity for government to exercise a unique and positive role by fostering free trade. We know from history that innovation and economic progress depend on the free flow of goods, services, capital, and expertise across borders. By enabling advanced economies and innovative companies to create partnerships, work across borders, and train local populations, government can support the most efficient use of resources and human capital. And as we confront our current economic challenges, Congress must resist the urge to turn its back on these proven policies. The United States cannot afford to raise barriers to trade. History reminds us that governmental policies that limit free markets and free trade can lead to a prolonged stagnation and substantial job losses, especially during times of economic weakness and recession. The decades ahead will hold many challenges for the American people. One of the most important will be how we get the energy to power our economy and sustain prosperity. For more than a century, the men and women of America's energy industry have been dedicated and disciplined in finding ways to meet America's energy needs, and we are committed to continuing that work. We will work together to invest, invent, and build integrated solutions that keep America's access to energy secure and our economy flexible and resilient. And in this time of economic challenge, the entire U.S. oil and natural gas industry is already working to reignite growth as quickly as possible. Our industry supports nearly 6 million jobs, and with our hard-won experience dealing with business downturns, we look forward to acting as an ongoing source of strength, confidence, and wise investment. We have many policy decisions to make in the weeks and months ahead. decisions that will shape the years and decades to come. At ExxonMobil, we look forward to doing our part to contribute to our nation's great and enduring national dialogue about energy, and to supply the light to make the sound decisions that will ensure a brighter future for all. I thank you for your kind attention.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Tillerson. We'll open it up for a few questions here. Oakley, why don't you begin?
Yeah, Mr. Tillerson, you made reference to the You made reference to the drop in oil price of over $100 a barrel, and we've seen that at the pump, of course, from $4 down to I paid $1.41 in South Carolina last week. Are you concerned that that drop will take away some of the impetus that we've seen over the last 6 months to a year in terms of looking for more public transit, carpooling, in other words, the population trying to figure out other ways to get from here to there?
Well, I think that's a risk, that obviously what created the great interest, as I mentioned in my remarks, on the part of the American people to really better understand energy, how they receive it, why it cost what it cost, what the challenges are, was driven by their pocketbook. When people feel things in their pocketbooks, they tend to want to find out, why am I feeling this pain in my backside? And so as that has come down, I think there is a risk that the interest may wane. And I think that's why it's so important that we as an industry and other policymakers not lose sight of the fact that this will be another transient change in the commodity cycle. It's still a commodity. It goes up, it goes down, it'll go up again, it may go down again. But having said that, for all the reasons that are articulated, it is really important that we continue to move towards a long range. And when I say long range, I tend to think in terms of 30, 40 to 50 years. I'm not thinking about the next 10. They're important, but we've got to get on with a long-term sustainable energy policy and strategy that we put in place, and then we leave it in place regardless of how administrations may come and go. And that's what we've always lacked in the past for an energy policy, is something that's been sustainable.
John.
Mr. Tillerson, John Setelides, welcome to the Wilson Center. You have argued here rather persuasively that there are global challenges that we face in addressing energy security, resilience, efficiency, performance. I don't think I heard you use the phrase energy independence. And yet that seems to be the popular buzz phrase among our nation's political leaders as they try to structure a new energy policy. Do you believe, sir, that energy independence for the United States is a realistic and commercially viable policy objective?
Well, I think when people talk about energy independence and then you ask the questions and say, well, what does that mean? What is it you're trying to achieve with that? What they're really trying to achieve is energy security. I think, that's what gives rise to, well, I don't feel secure about my energy sources. I don't feel secure about my options. And so it drives people to say, well, let's just bring it back all in-house. In answer to your question, and I've said many times publicly, energy independence is not a realistic objective for the United States. And not only that, but I think it's detrimental to a good discussion around what a long-range energy policy should constitute. It's not healthy for us from a global economy standpoint to suggest we're going to sever ourselves from the rest of the globe's energy supply. It's not healthy from a foreign relations standpoint. It's not healthy from a foreign economic interdependency standpoint. Whether we like it or not, our economy is globally interdependent. Energy is part of that global interdependence, and that's why, as I alluded to in my remarks, to achieve energy security in the U.S., you have to achieve global energy security. And so I think that's where I hope we can begin to focus policy discussions. When you set energy independence as the objective, it puts you on a path of policy choices which are not achievable any time in my lifetime, yours, or probably your children's. It may be achievable somewhere out there. I mean, there's no question in my mind, somewhere maybe later in this century, there'll be another option, but nobody knows what it is, and it's nowhere lurking on the horizon today. And so we are going to have to continue to participate in the global supply of energy. And what gives us energy security is to have access to as many sources as we can, from as many countries as we can, from as many different types of energy sources as we can. That will increase our energy security so that a disruption in any one geographic location or any one source of supply doesn't cripple our economy, because we have other options. And that's why in the piece today and in our energy outlook, we make the case why we really need to develop all the commercially viable sources, regardless of where they may be located. So, short answer, no, energy independence is not attainable, not at any time in the foreseeable future, and it also sets us on misguided courses when we make that the objective. I would hope we can change the debate to how do we achieve energy security.
Excuse me, Mr. Peter Dykstra in the back row there.
Yes, sir. I'm
pick up the microphone if you would.
At the Wilson Center. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
There's a decided difference as we look ahead to the future of transformation of our energy economy between an energy company and an oil and gas company. And it would help for you to define how Exxon Mobil is pursuing the alternatives you've alluded to with dollar figures in terms of exploration, if you have those on hand, as opposed to new oil and gas exploration. How much are you spending on oil and gas? How much are you spending on renewables?
We are fundamentally an oil and gas petrochemical company, have been for 125 years and are still today. And that is because, as I pointed out in the energy outlook, whether you look at ours or anyone else's, for the foreseeable future, at least for forecast out to the year 2030, and you can push those on out to the middle of the century if you want, the world is going to continue to require and rely upon oil and natural gas for 60% of its energy needs. And it is a depleting resource, so the current sources are always declining. And that means that's why we're always out having to look for and add to the resources that are developed, new capacity to replace what's declining and also to meet that growing demand. If you look at the role that alternatives will play, and to try to give this some context, and I mentioned in there that one of the differences we have on how to deal with climate change are time frames. One of the differences I think that I take with some on the role of alternatives is similarly time frames. 100 years ago, oil and natural gas accounted for 2% of the world's energy. Wood and coal, 90%. It was almost 60 years before the balance between oil and natural gas, coal and wood shifted to 50-50. It was another 20 years before natural gas finally grew to the point that it was equivalent to coal. So when you talk about fundamentally changing the supply of energy from one source to another, you're talking about a very long period of time to do that. And that's both a resource, whether it be a renewable resource, and it's also an infrastructure question. The size and the enormity of the energy infrastructure is something people just cannot grasp. There's nothing larger than the energy infrastructure in the world. There's nothing larger than the energy supply and demand balance in the world. It's an enormously large challenge. In our outlook, we have renewables growing to the year 2030 to about 14% in total. We take all forms of renewables. And so we do see it has an important role to play, because that 14% means it's 14% we don't have to find for oil, natural gas, or coal to supply. Now,
ExxonMobil's numbers or worldwide?
That's our number, and I think if you look at any of those other forecasts that I provided you, you'll find they're very similar. Those contemplate double-digit growth, 12% per year growth in renewables. That is an extraordinary growth rate for an emerging technology. And even at double-digit, that's as far as it can get in 25 years, because it's starting from a very small base and it's working on this enormous energy complex. Okay, so with that background, ExxonMobil is fundamentally an oil and gas company because we think that is what society needs and will have to have for the next 50 years. In the meantime, we are investing in research and technologies that are, I call them next generation. We're not investing in current generation of renewables because we see them as fairly old. while incremental improvements are being made as they expand, wind, solar, biofuels, we know that if there's going to be a fundamental shift like I mentioned over the last century, from coal wood to all natural gas, and from all natural gas to something else, renewable or whatever it is, we don't know what it is yet. It's yet to be discovered. So we are spending a lot of our time on how do we use what we have more efficiently and effectively, and I gave you some examples of that, because we know we have that. How can we help consumers use that more efficiently, more effectively? And then how do we search for the breakthroughs? And so we have a fair amount of what I call fundamental research underway looking for breakthroughs. The numbers aren't big, but unlike the notion some people have that the more money you throw at research, the more breakthroughs you have, we haven't found the cure to cancer yet. We made a lot of progress in 50 years. We haven't found the cure to a lot of things. So you do have to spend the research dollars, but just throwing more money doesn't mean, therefore, we'll have a breakthrough in 10 years instead of 20. So we have a significant amount of breakthrough research underway internally and collaboratively with academic institutions. The most notable is the Global Climate Energy Project at Stanford University, which we founded and provided $125 million of support, half of the support. That's a 10-year project. And we told Stanford, look, we don't want you working on incremental improvements. We want you working on breakthroughs. And it is all targeted at energy supply and consumption which lowers greenhouse gas emissions or is carbon free. And so their research is all targeted around that. And they have had a lot of interesting discoveries, but it is, it's a ways out there. They haven't found it either. So that's where we're pouring our efforts into and monitoring technology as it evolves. If we see something that we think holds promise, then obviously we're prepared to invest the shareholders' money into those promising areas where we can see that we could generate a return to our shareholders as well.
We've got an awful lot of hands up here, right here.
I'm Mike Mccracken from the Climate Institute. Climate change isn't just changing temperature. It's going to be rising sea level. It's going to be the other carbon problem, which is ocean acidification, which is already, that's a result of just pure chemical equilibrium. From what you're saying, the impacts from that are just going to be inevitable. There is no opportunity for not having very significant climate change, for the melting of Greenland that's already started to start contributing, so that sea level rise is 3 to 6 feet per century or more, even potentially in the future, for a long period of time in the future. That ocean acidification with the CO2 concentration going up high is going to start dissolving coral reefs and atolls around the world and disrupt marine life. There'll be a interesting sort of scientific statement coming out on that in a few weeks, I believe. You're basically saying that's inevitable and there's nothing else to do. Is that correct? Or if the world really committed to something different, something other than, the business as usual, could we make the transformation?
Well, that's your forecast of the inevitable. I was watching a program on CNN last night where they said the greatest fear is that climate change is going to lead to the next ice age because of a shutting down of the oceanic Gulf Stream, which I'm sure you're aware of. It'll be an interesting outcome that England ends up being frigid because the oceanic belt's shut down. I don't need to get into a debate with you about forecasting the future because I don't know. Okay, I read all the same reports. I talk to all the same experts. But my answer to your question is, if that is in fact the future, then in all likelihood, and it's on the time frame that you believe it is, then in all likelihood it is inevitable. And so we need to be thinking about a number of ways in which to manage that risk. Now, when you say, so if we think that's the future, why don't we just pick something? What is it you'd like to pick?
I agree with you. We have to do everything.
Okay, we'll go on to other questions here, Mr. Bush, then Dan. We want to conclude here fairly quickly, so we'll take 3 more questions. That'll be it. Fred, Dan, and then there'll be one others. Fred, can you take a microphone there?
Going back to your answer to the question about energy independence, what do you think about Boone Pitten's project, his plan for energy independence?
Well, I think it has a number of flaws in the assumptions behind it. Compressed natural gas in transportation vehicle use is not a bad idea, and there's a fair amount of compressed natural gas in fleet vehicles and commercial vehicles today. And where you have large fleets of vehicles, city buses, businesses that have pools that go back to a central location, then the economics of that actually makes some sense. To say we're going to convert, though, the passenger vehicle fleet to compressed natural gas is quite a different matter. First, there are a couple of precepts to his plan, and that is that we're going to eliminate this foreign oil. Well, if you displace oil because of transportation fuels, natural gas, the first barrel that's going to get displaced is the highest cost barrel. That's just the way it works. Refiners are always looking for the lowest cost barrel they can buy. Well, guess where all the high cost barrels are produced? Right here, in the mature areas of North America, Canada, the North Sea, the more stable places that we like. That's where the barrels will get displaced. The lowest cost barrels are in the Middle East, South America, a lot of the, Russia, because they're sitting on the largest resources with the lowest development cost. So all you're going to do is back off the high cost production, unless you're going to put in place some kind of prohibition of imports, and I don't think anybody wants to go there. So I think his plan has a number of flaws to it. If you do the math on how much wind power to back out X amount of transportation fuel, you're not going to make that big of a difference on the transportation demand. But again, I don't want to say it's an idea that ought to be discarded. I just think you have to recognize, okay, it's another one of these things we ought to look at carefully, and it's going to have some viability within certain limitations, and we ought to pursue it where it makes sense. But I think putting it in place, say, okay, I want to mandate this Canada to Mexico corridor, now we're into mandates and ordained outcomes, and that always concerns me.
Okay, Dan, and then Deidre, there'll be the last question will be over here. Dan.
Sir, I'd like to hear your comments about what you see as an interaction between our energy security and our military might, and how you see that going forward in the next 30 years with the global changes.
Well, that's a pretty difficult question in terms of, because I'm not sure when you say our military might, I'm going to assume what you're talking about is our ability to protect the United States and provide stability around the world. We have sufficient, again, this gets back to why I think you want to have energy security as an objective, not independence. Ensure you have access to as many sources of energy as you can, so that then the U.S. military has a lot of options as well, access to many sources to meet its needs. I do think that one of the elements that has long been absent in our foreign policy planning, energy has not been very, very well thought out in terms of how we integrate energy policy with foreign policy. It's been pretty narrowly focused on one region of the world, and that region only. And I think if we can open the lens finder up and think about, well, where are all the energy resources of the globe, and how should we be integrating our long-range energy security objectives with our foreign and economic policy objectives, I think we will broaden that whole discussion, and we will improve our energy security. And that comes through South America relationships, Southeast Asian relationships, even with Russia and other parts of the world that have large energy resources. How do we integrate all of that so that it's in their best interest to want to continue to be a reliable supplier of energy to the rest of the world? Because, again, to the extent you have global energy security, you get U.S. energy security.
Final question, all right.
Mr. Tillerson, you spoke briefly about the global dimensions of energy security, and as you know, Africa is one of the growing suppliers to the United States and the rest of the world, in part because of low production costs. But as you also know, some parts of Africa are vulnerable to unrest, And as an example, Mobil in Nigeria overtook Shell as the largest producer for two reasons. One is that its production was mainly offshore, but also because it had developed some goodwill with communities onshore in Akwa Ibom State, which was next to its facilities. However, in the last 2 days, there has been an attack on one of Mobil's facilities offshore, and this followed another attempt to kidnap some members of a convoy at the end of December onshore. And so I wondered if this has given rise to further thinking about what an enlightened policy for operating in vulnerable areas of the world, such as this, would be, given that heat, own metaphor, spreads from the onshore to the offshore.
Yeah. Well, in the case of Nigeria, and as you mentioned, we have enjoyed decades of very good relations in Akwa Ibom State, and it's why we have largely been insulated from much of the unrest in Nigeria, because the local community, in effect, protects us. When militants from the outside want to come into the community and try to create problems, the local leaders tell them, you're not welcome here. And you really, we don't want it. We have a good situation down here. That was achieved because we did some things right at the very beginning. And we look to that as a good model when we're entering other new emerging countries and establishing our operations. And one of the early understandings that was established in the Akwa Ibom State with both the tribal leaders and the governor was, when they came calling and said, we need a check for X amount, and we said, well, what are you going to do with it? Well, we want to build a school. We said, tell you what, we'll build you the school. And if you want to name it after yourself or somebody else, that's fine, and you can cut the ribbon on it. But we're going to build the school so we know the school gets built. In other words, we got an early understanding that we're going to support the community development. The community is going to see the benefits of our presence there, but we're going to stay in control of how all of that happens in terms of where the money goes locally. Now, federal government, we pay our taxes, we pay our fees just like we do in this country, and we don't have a lot of control over where it gets spent. But that, just in a nutshell, that's why we have that situation there. Now, the recent events that we've experienced in Nigeria have been criminal in nature, and they're a result of the lawless environment that exists in Nigeria along the Niger Delta, and in particular in the Warri region. And the criminals are just branching out to see what else they can put their hands on. The recent attack that was reported on our offshore platform was a robbery. It was 12 guys showed up on boats. They robbed our employees, took their watches, their wallets. They stole some of our laptop computers, and they left. And that's generally what's the motivation behind most of the attacks against us. Now, having said that, we are mindful of the security situation there, as we are everywhere. But I think the example I gave you of how you get started correctly, so much is determined by how you set the expectation on the ground the day you show up. And it starts with saying no, being willing to say, no, we're not going to do it that way. We'll do it this way. And if we can't do it this way, then we won't be here. And that's been the way my company has operated around the world throughout my entire career. We will walk away if we can't have an acceptable situation on the ground. We'll just leave. That doesn't mean it's not tough. It doesn't mean you don't have problems. It doesn't mean you don't have to manage it. But it can be done, and it can be done in a way that the local community benefits enormously, and the Akwa Ibom State community has benefited enormously. That's why we enjoy a good relationship there.
I'm sorry I haven't been able to get everybody a chance to answer a question. There have been good many hands up. Let's give Mr. Tillerson a round of applause.